The diner smelled like burnt coffee and bacon grease. Nobody in Millbrook noticed the waitress with the steady hands. She wore her hair pulled back tight, no jewelry, no perfume. She kept her eyes down and her voice low, and she made herself as unremarkable as the laminated menus she carried. Her name tag said Rena. That was not her real name. For 6 years, she had been nobody. A woman who refilled coffee cups at 6 a.m. and mopped floors at midnight. A woman nobody looked at twice. That was the point. Nobody knew that 6 years ago, Rena had been someone else entirely. Someone with a different name, a different life, a different kind of steadiness in her hands. The kind you don't learn pouring coffee. Then, on a gray Tuesday morning, a man in a faded navy jacket walked in, sat down at booth 4, and asked for eggs over easy and black coffee. She wrote his order the way she always did. Quick. Practiced. A small, distinctive slant on the capital letters, left over from years of writing things that mattered under pressure. He looked down at the ticket, and went completely still. Hey, before we go any further, welcome back to Silent Heroes. If you're new here, this is where we tell the stories of the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the people carrying more than anyone around them ever guesses. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from tonight and take a guess. What do you think Rena used to be? Hit subscribe so you don't miss a single story. Now back to Millbrook. Millbrook was the kind of town that existed on old maps and nowhere else. One traffic light. One diner. A gas station that still took check. Rena had picked it on purpose. She had a list, once. A mental checklist she ran every time she needed to disappear. Small town, no military base nearby, no VA hospital, no reason for anyone from her old life to ever pass through. Millbrook checked every box. She was 34, though people guessed older because of her eyes. They were the kind of eyes that had seen too much and decided the safest thing to do with that knowledge was to look at nothing at all. A thin white scar ran along her left eyebrow, barely visible unless the light hit it right. She kept it hidden under a swept bang. Her hands, though, her hands were the part she couldn't fully disguise. Steady. Too steady. The kind of steady that comes from holding pressure on a wound while counting seconds out loud, calm, over and over, until help arrived or it didn't. She had learned the fastest way to survive was to make herself small. Small enough that Frank Doyle, the diner's owner and self-appointed king of Millbrook, barely registered her as a person. Frank liked to remind everyone who was in charge. He'd snap his fingers at her across the room. He'd say things like, "Rena, honey, we're not running a library, pick up the pace," loud enough for the whole diner to hear, loud enough to make her ears burn. Frank wasn't cruel because he was strong. Frank was cruel because he was afraid of looking weak, and humiliating a quiet waitress was the cheapest way he knew to feel like a man in charge of something. Rena never answered back. She had learned that too. The fastest way to end a confrontation was to give it nothing to feed on. There was only one person in Millbrook who ever looked at her like she was more than a name tag. Old Mr. Abernathy came in every morning at 6:15, ordered the same dry wheat toast, and watched her over the rim of his coffee cup like he was reading a book he couldn't quite finish. "You ever notice," he said to her one morning, "how you check the exits when you walk into a room?" Rena froze for half a second. Just half a second. "Old habit," she said. Abernathy said, not buying it for a second, but not pushing either. "Whatever you used to be, girl, I hope you find your way back to it someday. World's short on people who check the exits for the right reasons." She never forgot that sentence. She just didn't know yet how soon she'd need it back. It happened on a Thursday, 7:42 in the morning, and Millbrook Diner was full. Truckers, 2 off-duty deputies, a table of retirees arguing about the weather. Rena was pouring coffee at the counter when the door burst open so hard the bell above it cracked against the frame. A man stumbled in, one hand clamped over the side of his neck, blood running dark and fast between his fingers. Behind him, someone was screaming about a car accident out on Route 9. Frank Doyle was the first to react, badly. "Someone get him a towel," he shouted, already reaching for a dish rag instead of anything sterile, already pressing it against the wound at the wrong angle, already making it worse. Rena's whole body changed before her mind caught up. The tremor in her hands vanished. Her spine straightened. And somewhere behind her ribs, a voice she hadn't used in 6 years said, very clearly, "That's not a laceration. That's arterial. He has 90 seconds, maybe less." "Move," Rena said. Just one word. But something in the way she said it made Frank step back without deciding to. She dropped to her knees beside the bleeding man, shoved the dish rag aside, and pressed 2 fingers directly into the wound at an angle Frank's untrained hand never could have found. "Somebody call 911, she said, voice flat and even. "Tell them arterial bleed, right carotid region, adult male, conscious. Tell them now." One of the off-duty deputies fumbled for his phone. The other just stared. Nobody knew that 6 years ago this exact scenario, chaos, blood, seconds ticking, had been Rena's entire life. Not once. Not twice. Dozens of times, in places far worse than a diner in Millbrook, with far less light to see by. "Sir, look at me," she said to the wounded man, whose name she would later learn was Dale Whitfield, 41, a long-haul trucker who'd swerved to miss a deer and clipped a guardrail hard enough to send a jagged piece of trim straight into his neck. "You're going to feel my hand and it's going to hurt. That's good. That means you're still with me." Dale's eyes rolled toward her, wide and glassy with panic. "Stay with my voice," Rena said. "Not the ceiling. Me." For the people watching, it looked like magic. It wasn't. It was training. The kind of training that turns panic into a checklist, that turns fear into pressure applied at exactly the right point, for exactly the right duration, without flinching. A carotid arterial bleed empties a body of blood in under 2 minutes if the pressure isn't precise. Too high and you cut off circulation to the brain entirely. Too low and the bleeding continues unchecked. The window for correct manual pressure, direct, focused, angled just off the pulse point rather than directly over it, is narrow enough that most people, even trained EMTs without field trauma experience, hesitate. Rena did not hesitate. Her fingers found the spot like she'd never left it. 90 seconds, she murmured, mostly to herself. Ambulance is 11 minutes out. Do the math. She didn't wait for the math to work itself out favorably. She reached up, without looking, and grabbed a fresh dish towel off the counter, folded it into a tight square one-handed, and transferred pressure without ever breaking contact with the wound, a technique that kept the clot forming underneath from being disturbed. "Frank." Her voice cut through the room. "First aid kit. Now. And bring me the roll of gauze, not the little packets." Frank didn't argue this time. Frank, for the first time in 6 years, did exactly what he was told. The diner had gone dead silent except for Dale's ragged breathing and the low murmur of Rena's voice, steady, counting. "You're doing good, Dale. Stay here with me. 60 more seconds." Her hands were not shaking. They had not shaken once. The paramedics arrived 9 minutes later, 2 minutes faster than dispatch had promised, because the 911 operator had heard the word arterial used with clinical precision by a caller who clearly knew exactly what she was looking at, and had bumped the call to the highest priority on the board. When the lead paramedic knelt down beside Dale and saw the wound already controlled, the bleeding slowed to a manageable seep, the pressure point exact, he looked up at Rena with something between confusion and awe. "Who taught you that?" he asked. Rena's mouth opened. Closed. "I used to work in medical," she said. Nothing more. It wasn't a lie. It also wasn't close to the whole truth. The paramedics took over, transferred Dale onto a gurney, and wheeled him out through the cracked diner door into the gray morning light. He would survive. The paramedic would later confirm the field intervention was, in his own words, textbook, better than most ER nurses I've seen. But Rena wasn't listening to praise. She was staring down at her own hands, which had gone from perfectly steady to trembling the second the crisis passed, The opposite of what most people expected, but exactly the pattern she remembered from years ago. Calm in the storm. Shaking after. The whole diner was staring at her now. Frank Doyle included. And Frank Doyle did not like being upstaged in his own restaurant. "Well," he said loudly, forcing a laugh that came out thin and brittle, trying to reclaim the room. "Guess we know who's cleaning up the blood, then, don't we, Rena?" A few nervous laughed. Not many. Old Mr. Abernathy, still sitting at the counter, did not laugh at all. He was watching Rena with an expression that wasn't surprise. It was recognition. "Girl," he said quietly, just to her, as she walked past him with her hands still trembling, "that wasn't used to work in medical." Rena didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because at that exact moment the bell over the door, still hanging crooked from being struck, rang again. A man stepped inside. Broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, a faded navy jacket, the kind of posture that came from a career of standing at attention even when no one was watching. He looked like he'd walked in off the highway, tired, in need of coffee and eggs. He didn't look at the blood still drying on the floor tile. He looked at Rena. And something in his face changed. Not shock, not confusion. Recognition. He walked to booth 4, sat down slowly, like a man lowering himself carefully around an old injury, and said nothing until she approached with her notepad, hands still not quite steady. "Coffee black," he said. "Eggs over easy." She wrote it down. Habit. Fast, practiced, the same small distinctive slant she'd carried since flight school, since long before Millbrook, since long before Rena was even a name she'd chosen for herself. She tore the ticket, set it on the table in front of him, and turned to walk to the kitchen. That was when he looked down, and went completely still. He stared at the ticket for a long moment. Not at the order. At the handwriting. That particular slant on the capital letters. The way she crossed her sevens. The tight, economical print of someone trained to write fast, legibly, under pressure, the kind of handwriting the Navy drills into you when a mistake on a flight log or a medevac chart can cost a life. He had seen that handwriting before. On casualty cards. On 100 field reports. On the inside cover of a logbook, he still kept in a drawer at home, because he couldn't bring himself to throw it away. "Rena," he said quietly, testing the name like it tasted wrong in his mouth. She stopped halfway to the kitchen. "Yes, sir." He didn't answer right away. He was looking at her now the way a man looks at someone he'd been told, officially, in writing, was dead. "What's your last name?" he asked. "Miller," she said. Steady. Practiced. A lie she'd told so many times it came out smoother than the truth ever had. The man's jaw tightened. "I knew a woman who wrote tickets exactly like that," he said. "Exactly like that. Same slant. Same crossed sevens. She wrote medevac charts on the inside of a Black Hawk doing 140 knots over hostile terrain, and her handwriting never changed, not once, not even under fire." The diner had gone quiet again, a different kind of quiet than the blood and panic silence from an hour before. This was a held-breath quiet. A room sensing it was standing on the edge of something. "I don't know what you're talking about," Rena said. Her call sign, the man said, was Lark. The word hit the room like a detonation. Rena's hand, still holding the coffee pot, did not move. But something behind her eyes did. A flicker, gone as fast as it came, like a door opening a half-inch and slamming shut again. "I need to check on table 6, she said, and turned away. "Lieutenant Commander Rena Voss," the man said, louder now, not shouting, but pitched to carry across the whole diner. "Flight surgeon. 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. Killed in action, March, 6 years ago, according to the report I personally signed." Every head in the diner turned toward her. Frank Doyle's mouth fell open. "Rena," Frank said, laughing nervously, trying to salvage the moment with a joke that landed nowhere, "you didn't tell me you had a whole military career, sweetheart. What else you hiding? Secret bank account?" Nobody laughed this time. Not even a little. The man stood up from booth 4. He was tall, and even in a faded jacket, he carried himself like someone used to being obeyed the second he opened his mouth. "I'm not wrong," he said. "It wasn't a question." Rena set the coffee pot down on the counter, very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands are the only thing keeping you from shattering. "You need to leave," she said, quiet, controlled, but her voice had a crack in it now that hadn't been there an hour ago, not even during the emergency. "Please. They told your parents you died over the Hindu Kush," he said, ignoring her, taking one step closer. "They gave you a medal you never got to see. I stood at your memorial. I read your name off a plaque. And here you are, pouring coffee in a diner that doesn't even know your real name." "Stop," Rena said. Frank, sensing an opportunity to seize back control of a room that had entirely stopped belonging to him, straightened his collar and puffed out his chest. "All right, buddy, that's enough," he said, stepping toward the man with the particular bravado of someone who had never once had to back it up. "This is my restaurant, and whatever's going on here, you don't get to come in and harass my staff." "Sit down, Frank," Mr. Abernathy said from the counter, not even raising his voice. Frank blinked. "Excuse me." "I said sit down," Abernathy repeated, and something in the old man's tone made even Frank Doyle obey. The stranger in the navy jacket didn't look at Frank at all. His eyes stayed fixed on Rena. "My name is Commander Aaron Reyes," he said. "I flew the bird that pulled your unit out of that valley. I was there the day command told me you didn't make it. I have spent 6 years believing I lost one of the best flight surgeons I ever served with." His voice dropped, rough now, thick with something that wasn't anger at all, it was grief, unraveling in real time. "And I am looking right at you." Rena's hands, resting on the counter, had begun to tremble again. Not from adrenaline this time. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "Then make me understand," Reyes said. "Because 6 years is a long time to grieve someone who was pouring coffee 40 miles off the interstate the whole time." The diner held its breath. Rena looked at the door. Looked at the exits, the way she always did, the way Abernathy had noticed weeks ago and never mentioned again until this exact moment. And for the first time in 6 years, she didn't move toward one. "Not here," she said instead. "Not like this." "Then where?" Reyes asked. "Because I'm not walking back out that door until I understand why the woman I mourned is standing in front of me alive." Rena closed her eyes for one long second. When she opened them, something in her had changed. The same shift that had come over her when Dale Whitfield walked through the door bleeding. Spine straight. Eyes clear. The tremor gone. "Booth by the window," she said. "Give me 5 minutes to close my section." Reyes nodded once, sharp, military. He sat back down in booth 4. And Rena walked into the kitchen to face 6 years of the truth she'd been running from, and the man who had just carried it through the front door. She came out of the kitchen without her apron. Reyes was still in booth 4, both hands wrapped around a coffee mug he hadn't touched, watching the door like she might run for it anyway. She slid into the seat across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The diner had mostly gone back to its own business, though the retirees kept glancing over, and Frank Doyle hovered near the register pretending to count receipts while listening to every word. "Say it," Reyes said finally. "Tell me I'm wrong." "You're not wrong," Rena said. Something in his shoulders sagged, relief and fury tangled together. 6 years, Voss, he said low. 6 years I carried your name on a memorial wall in my head. I didn't ask you to carry anything, she said, and it came out sharper than she meant. No, he agreed. You just let everyone believe you were dead instead. Rena looked down at her own hands, flat on the table now, steady again, the way they always steadied once a decision had been made. The extraction went wrong, she said. You know that part. What you don't know is what happened after. My status got flagged classified. Not because I died, but because of what I saw before the bird went down. Intelligence nobody wanted attached to a name that could be searched, followed, found. She paused. They gave me a choice. Come home under a different name and stay quiet, or come home under my own name and become a target for the people who wanted that intelligence buried. That's not how casualty reporting works, Reyes said, but his voice had lost its certainty. It is when the people writing the report answer to someone above the flight line, Rena said. I didn't choose this because I wanted to disappear from you. I chose it because staying alive meant disappearing from everyone. Nobody knew that, for 6 years, she had rehearsed this exact conversation in her head 100 different ways, in 100 different diners, imagining 100 different faces on the other side of the booth. None of them had looked quite this wrecked. For 6 years, she said quietly, I told myself the mission was worth it, that the people I protected by staying dead were worth more than the people I hurt by staying gone. Her voice caught, just slightly. I still believe that. I just didn't expect to have to say it out loud to your face. Reyes exhaled slowly, some of the anger draining into something heavier. Your parents believe you're dead, he said. I know. Your team held a memorial with an empty casket. I know that too. Her jaw tightened. You think I don't replay that every single day? You think making myself small in a town like this doesn't cost me something? For the first time, Reyes looked at her, really looked, not at the ghost he thought he'd buried, but at the woman across from him, the one who'd just saved a stranger's life with her bare hands an hour ago, while the rest of the room panicked. That thing you did this morning, he said. The bleed. What about it? That wasn't luck. That was training nobody unlearns. He leaned forward. You've been sitting on skills that could be saving lives in a real trauma unit, and instead you're pouring coffee in a town with one traffic light. That's the point, Commander, Rena said, and the old rank slipped out of her mouth before she could stop it, muscle memory older than her fear. I don't get to have a real life. I get to have a safe one. Before Reyes could answer, Frank Doyle finally found the nerve to insert himself, striding over with the kind of forced authority men like him mistake for confidence. All right, look, Frank said, hands on his hips. I don't know what military drama I just walked into, but Rena, whatever this is, you've been on the clock for the last 10 minutes not working, and frankly, after this morning's little episode, I've got customers asking questions I don't have answers to. Rena looked up at him, and something in her face had shifted since this morning. The invisibility was already cracking, and Frank could see it, and it scared him more than he wanted to admit. I'm on my break, Frank, she said evenly. You don't get breaks you didn't clock, Frank snapped, louder now, performing for the room the way he always did. And you know what I've been thinking? Ever since that mess with the trucker, folks in here have been looking at you funny, whispering, and now this is exactly the kind of attention I don't need in my restaurant. Frank, Abernathy said warningly from the counter. No, I'm serious, Frank said, working himself up. Rena, effective right now, you're suspended. Go home. We'll talk about whether there's a place for you here once things calm down. The diner went quiet again. Reyes stood up slowly from the booth, and even in a faded jacket, even off-duty, even 6 years removed from a cockpit, he filled the room the way men trained to lead a team into gunfire always do. You're suspending the woman who saved a man's life an hour ago, he said, for doing exactly what she was trained, decorated, and nearly killed doing. With respect, Frank said, though there was none in his voice, this isn't a military installation. This is my diner, and I make the rules here. Rena stood too. Slowly, deliberately. She untied the apron string at her waist, the one thing keeping Rena the waitress stitched onto her body, and set it folded on the table. No, she said. 2 words. Steady, resolute, the tremor entirely gone. I am just done hiding. Frank blinked, caught off guard by how little his authority seemed to matter to her anymore. Excuse me. I'm not going home, Rena said. There's a man in this town who might need medical attention again before that ambulance can get here. There's people in this diner who deserve to know the truth instead of whatever rumor you're about to invent to save face. And there is absolutely nothing left for you to threaten me with, Frank, because the worst thing that could ever happen to me already happened, and I lived through it." A small crowd had gathered without anyone quite noticing, the retirees standing, 2 truckers by the door, even the dishwasher poking his head out from the kitchen. And every single one of them was watching Frank Doyle's face turn a deep, humiliated red. Frank opened his mouth to salvage what was left of his authority, but before he could get a word out, the diner's cracked front bell rang again. 2 more figures stepped through the doorway. A woman in a sharp gray suit, government ID clipped to her belt, moved with the brisk certainty of someone who did not waste steps. Behind her, an older man in dress uniform, full colonel's insignia on his shoulder, walked in like the room already belonged to him. Reyes straightened the moment he saw them. "Colonel Hargrove," he said, surprised. "Commander," the colonel said, nodding once, then letting his gaze land on Rena. He studied her for a long moment, the way a man studies something he'd given up hope of ever seeing again. "Lieutenant Commander Voss," he said quietly. "I'll be damned." Nobody knew that Reyes had made a call from the parking lot the moment Rena walked into the kitchen, not to report her, but because some truths are too large for one man to carry alone, and he wanted witnesses who could make this right instead of just believing it. The woman in the gray suit stepped forward. "Ms. Voss, my name is Special Agent Priya Kessler, Naval Criminal Investigative Service. I need you to know up front that you are not in any trouble. Your status has just become a matter of significant institutional embarrassment for several people who are not in this room." "What's going on?" Frank demanded, some of his bravado curdling into confusion. "Who are you people?" Kessler didn't even look at him. "Sir, I'm going to need you to stay quiet unless spoken to." Colonel Hargrove reached into his jacket and withdrew a thin folder, worn at the corners from having been opened and closed many times over many years. "6 years ago," he said, addressing the room now, his voice carrying the practiced authority of a man used to briefings, Lieutenant Commander Rena Voss was declared killed in action following an extraction gone wrong in a classified operational theater. What was never made public, what very few people were ever told, was that her survival, and the intelligence she carried out with her, was buried by someone inside her own chain of command who had a financial interest in that intelligence never surfacing. The diner had gone utterly silent. Even the retirees had stopped their coffee mid-sip. "Read it," Reyes said quietly. "All of it. She's earned that much, in front of people who've been treating her like she's nobody." Hargrove opened the folder. "Lieutenant Commander Rena Voss," he read aloud, "United States Navy, Flight Surgeon, 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. Awarded the Bronze Star with Combat V for actions under direct enemy fire, stabilizing 3 critically wounded soldiers during an ambush while continuing to direct emergency triage under sustained hostile engagement. Awarded the Purple Heart for injuries sustained during that same engagement. Nominated, posthumously, incorrectly as it turns out, for the Navy Cross, an award that was quietly shelved when her death was recorded, because a dead woman's heroism is easier to file away than a living one's inconvenient testimony." A murmur rippled through the small crowd. Frank's mouth had fallen open. His face had gone from red to a pale, sweating gray. "Her call sign," Hargrove continued, "was Lark. Because in 6 years of combat medicine, in the worst conditions this country has ever asked a flight surgeon to work in, not one soldier under her care ever died without her fighting for them until the very last second she had breath to fight with." He closed the folder. "That woman," he said, nodding toward Rena, "has spent the last 6 years hiding not because she was weak, but because the truth she carried was dangerous to people with a great deal to lose. And this morning, apparently, she saved another life with her bare hands in a diner in the middle of nowhere, because that's simply who she is, whether the world is watching or not." Frank Doyle, sensing the exact size of the hole he had dug for himself, tried one last, desperate grasp at control. "Now hold on," he said, voice cracking. "I didn't know any of this. How was I supposed to know she was some kind of war hero? She never said a word, She's been nothing but a quiet employee who— You suspended her 10 minutes ago, Abernathy said flatly from the counter, for saving a man's life. That's not. I was trying to run a business. I have liability concerns, I have. You have, Agent Kessler interrupted, calm and clipped, a decorated combat medic whom you just publicly humiliated in front of 2 federal witnesses, immediately after she prevented a bystander from bleeding to death in your restaurant. I'd choose my next sentence very carefully, Mr. Doyle. Frank's next sentence never came. He simply stood there, mouth working uselessly, the entire diner watching him shrink in real time, the exact fate he had spent 6 years trying to inflict on Rena, now landing squarely on him instead. Rena hadn't said a word through the entire reading. She stood very still, hands folded in front of her, eyes fixed somewhere past all of them, somewhere 6 years and 1 valley away. Lark, Reyes said quietly, using the call sign like it was a hand extended across a very long distance. You still with us? Rena blinked, and something in her chest that had been locked for 6 years loosened, just slightly. Yeah, she said. I'm here. But even as the words left her mouth, Agent Kessler's expression shifted, something between caution and grim purpose. There's more, Kessler said. And I don't think this is the moment to say all of it in front of a crowd. But you should know, the person who buried your death report, Commander Voss, the person who made sure a live war hero stayed listed as a dead one for 6 years so a very lucrative contract wouldn't get questioned. She paused. He's not in some office 3 states away. He's a lot closer than that. And he's been watching this town for weeks. The diner went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. What do you mean, closer than that? Rena said, and for the first time since Reyes had walked through the door, her voice had lost its steadiness. Kessler exchanged a glance with Colonel Hargrove, who gave a short, grim nod as if to say she needs to hear it now, not later. The intelligence you carried out of that valley, Kessler said, exposed a defense contractor that was billing the government for medical evacuation equipment that didn't meet spec, equipment that failed in the field, equipment that got soldiers killed because a tourniquet snapped or a coagulant pack didn't clot the way it was supposed to. Someone in your own chain of command was taking a cut to look the other way on inspections. And when Voss survived and started asking questions before extraction, Hargrove added, that someone decided it was cheaper to lose a flight surgeon than lose a contract worth 11 figures. Who? Rena said. Just the one word, flat, dangerous. His name is Elliot Marsh, Kessler said. Former acquisitions liaison, quietly discharged 18 months ago under a confidentiality agreement instead of a court-martial, because the people he was protecting had more lawyers than we had time. He's been off our radar since. Until 3 weeks ago. What happened 3 weeks ago? Reyes asked. He surfaced in this county, Kessler said. Under a different name. Running medical equipment sales to small rural clinics and private practices. The exact same faulty product line, repackaged, resold to people who don't have the resources to inspect it closely. We've been building a case for months. We didn't know Rena Voss was alive and working 40 minutes from his current base of operations until Commander Reyes's phone call an hour ago connected the dots for us. Rena's jaw tightened. You're telling me the man who let everyone believe I was dead so his cover-up could stay buried is selling the same defective equipment to civilians? Here. Now. Yes, Kessler said. And you didn't know, Rena said, until today. We didn't have your testimony, Kessler said. We had circumstantial evidence and a paper trail that dead ends at a shell company. What we needed was someone who saw the equipment fail firsthand, in the field, and can testify to exactly how and why it failed. Someone with your medical expertise, describing exactly what should have happened versus what did. She hesitated. We needed Lark. Alive. On the record. Frank Doyle, still standing near the register, had gone very quiet, watching the scale of what he'd stumbled into with the dawning horror of a man realizing his humiliation over a suspended waitress was the least significant thing happening in his restaurant today. Rena looked at the folder still in Hargrove's hands, then at the faces around her. Reyes, steady and resolute. Kessler, sharp and waiting. Abernathy at the counter, watching her the way he had for weeks, like he'd known all along she was more than the woman pouring his coffee. "Where is he now?" Rena said. "Marsh. 20 minutes from here," Kessler said. "There's a rural clinic on Route 9, same road as this morning's accident, as it happens, scheduled to receive a shipment of his equipment this afternoon. Tourniquets, hemostatic gauze, coagulant pack. All of it rated to fail under the exact conditions this county sees on a regular basis. Farm accidents, car wrecks, the kind of trauma where a defective product means someone bleeds out instead of surviving." "Like Dale," Rena said quietly. "Like Dale," Kessler agreed. "Except next time, you might not be standing there with your hands free to fix what the equipment can't." Something settled into Rena's face then. Not fear, not the frozen invisibility she'd worn for 6 years, but the same cold clarity she'd carried into Booth 4 when Reyes first said the word Lark. The same clarity that had dropped the tremor from her hands the moment Dale Whitfield walked through the door bleeding. "Then we go now," she said. "Before that shipment reaches the clinic." "Ms. Voss," Kessler said carefully, "this needs to be handled through proper channels. Surveillance. A warrant. We can't just—" "You said it yourself," Rena cut in. "You needed someone who saw the equipment fail firsthand. I'm not just a witness who can describe a defective coagulant pack in a courtroom 6 months from now. I'm the only person in this room who can walk into that clinic, inspect the shipment, and know within 30 seconds whether it's the same faulty batch that nearly got me and 3 of my own men killed." Reyes stepped closer to her. "Voss, listen to her. This isn't a 2-man extraction. This is federal. I've spent 6 years hiding so a war criminal could keep selling death to civilians without consequence," Rena said, and her voice had gone hard now, the softness of Rena the waitress entirely burned away, leaving only the woman underneath. "I am not spending 1 more hour hiding, while he does it to people in this county who don't even know they're at risk." She looked at Kessler. "You want your case built airtight? Bring me with you. Let me see the shipment before it's disturbed, before Marsh has any warning that anyone's onto him. You get your testimony and your evidence in the same afternoon, or you can spend the next 6 months building a paper case around a man who's already proven he's good at making evidence disappear." Kessler studied her for a long moment, then looked at Hargrove. The colonel gave the smallest nod. "Get her a vest," Kessler said finally. "And somebody find this town a working phone signal, because if this goes sideways, I want backup rolling before we're anywhere near that clinic." Rena turned toward the kitchen door, already moving with the clipped, economical stride of a woman who had spent 6 years pretending she didn't know how to move like that anymore. Frank Doyle, still standing frozen by the register, found his voice one last time. "Rena, wait. Your shift. I didn't mean what I said. I was just—" She didn't stop walking. "It's Voss," she said, without turning around. "And I quit." By 1:15 that afternoon, a plain government sedan and Reyes's truck were parked half a mile from the Route 9 clinic, tucked behind a stand of pines where the gravel shoulder widened enough to hide 2 vehicles from the road. Rena sat in the back seat of the sedan, a borrowed vest heavy across her shoulders, her hands steady on a tablet Kessler had handed her showing photographs of the equipment shipment manifest. "Same batch numbers," Rena said, tracing a finger down the screen. "Same supplier code I flagged 6 years ago. He didn't even bother changing the packaging design, just the company name on the label." "Confident?" Kessler asked. "I watched a hemostatic pack from this exact production run fail on a 19-year-old corporal named Danny Cho," Rena said, voice flat, controlled, the clinical distance of someone who had trained herself to say terrible things without her voice breaking. "It's supposed to clot in under 90 seconds under active bleeding. His took 4 minutes to even begin working. I know this batch by the smell of the adhesive backing before I know it by the label. Reyes, in the front passenger seat, looked back at her. "Cho make it?" "No," Rena said. 2 letters. Nothing more. Nobody spoke for a moment. Nobody knew that, for 6 years, Danny Cho's name had been the sentence Rena repeated to herself on the worst nights. The reason she'd agreed to disappear in the first place, the reason staying dead had ever felt like a price worth paying, because the alternative was a courtroom, a media circus, and an intelligence leak that might have gotten more soldiers killed before the contractor could even be indicted. Except now she understood the leak had never stopped the killing. It had just moved it to a rural clinic full of people who'd never worn a uniform in their lives. "We move on my signal," Kessler said, checking her weapon and slipping it back into its holster. "Local sheriff's department is staged 2 minutes out, holding until we confirm the shipment's on-site and unopened. Voss, you're not law enforcement, you understand that. You inspect, you confirm, you step back. That's the deal." "Understood," Rena said. It was not, entirely, a promise she intended to keep. The clinic was a squat brick building with a gravel lot and a hand-painted sign that read County Family Health. Walk-in-s welcome. A delivery van sat backed up to the side entrance, rear doors open, 2 men in matching polo shirts hauling boxes inside. Rena recognized the third man immediately, even from 100 yards, even after 6 years, even though he'd let his hair go gray and grown a beard that hadn't been there in the file photo. Marsh. He stood near the van with a clipboard, directing the unloading with the easy authority of a man who'd never once had to answer for what was inside those boxes. "That's him," Rena said quietly. "Confirmed," Kessler said into her radio. "Subject on site, shipment actively being unloaded. Hold positions." They watched for 3 long minutes as boxes moved from the van into the clinic's supply room. Rena counted them under her breath, 11, 12, 13, cross-referencing against the manifest on her tablet. 13 boxes on the manifest, she said. "I only count 11 going in." Kessler frowned. Meaning either 2 boxes are still in the van, Rena said, or 2 boxes already left in something other than that van, and I don't like either option. As if in answer, one of the polo shirt men climbed back into the van's cab, and the engine turned over. "He's moving the vehicle," Reyes said. "Not the vehicle," Rena said, already reaching for the door handle, her voice sharpening into something clipped and urgent. "Watch Marsh's hands." Marsh had stepped away from the clinic entrance, phone pressed to his ear, and was walking briskly toward a second, smaller car parked at the edge of the lot, a car that hadn't been there when they first pulled up. "He made us," Rena said. Kessler swore under her breath and keyed her radio. "All units, move in now. Subject is attempting to flee eastbound lot exit. Repeat, move in now." But Marsh was already in the car, already reversing hard out of the space, gravel spraying, and the 2 remaining boxes, the ones that had never made it inside, sat exposed in the open bed of a pickup truck parked beside the delivery van, catching the afternoon light. Rena was out of the sedan and moving before anyone could stop her, sprinting low across the lot toward the pickup, because 13-11 wasn't just a discrepancy in a shipment count. It was 2 boxes of defective coagulant packs and hemostatic gauze, sitting unsecured in a truck bed, with the keys still in the ignition, and a man behind the wheel of that truck who had just noticed federal agents pouring out of the tree line and was reaching for something under his own seat that was not a set of car keys. "Voss, get down!" Reyes shouted. The truck's engine roared to life. And Rena Voss, Lark, flight surgeon, decorated, dead for 6 years and finished hiding, ran straight toward it anyway. The truck lurched forward, tires spitting gravel, and for one heart-stopping second it looked like it would clip Rena where she stood. She threw herself sideways at the last instant, rolling hard against the pickup's bed rail, and came up with both hands locked around the tailgate. The driver, one of the polo shirt men, panicked now, in over his head, hit the brakes instead of the gas, some last flicker of self-preservation overriding whatever instructions Marsh had barked at him seconds earlier. That hesitation was all Reyes needed. He was already there, hauling the driver's door open, pulling the man out onto the gravel with the economical, practiced force of someone who had done this before, somewhere far from Millbrook, under far worse conditions. Kessler's team swept past them, converging on Marsh's car, which had barely made it 30 yards before a sheriff's cruiser cut it off at the lot's exit, blue lights strobing across the tree line. For a moment it looked like it might end there, clean and simple. It did not. Marsh threw his car into reverse, tires screaming, cutting hard across the gravel toward the clinic's side entrance, toward the open supply room door, toward the 11 boxes already inside, toward, Rena realized with a cold lurch of understanding, an escape route through the building itself and out the other side, where the tree line offered cover a man on foot might actually use. "He's going for the clinic," she shouted. "There are patients in there." She was moving again before she'd finished the sentence, cutting across the lot at an angle, not toward Marsh but toward the clinic's front entrance, the one place she knew, with absolute certainty from years of trauma work, that innocent people were sitting in waiting room chairs with no idea what was about to come through the building. Inside, the scene was exactly what she'd feared. A young mother with a toddler on her hip. An elderly man with a cane. A nurse behind the front desk frozen mid-sentence on the phone, staring out the window at the chaos in the parking lot. "Everyone down, now, away from the windows," Rena said, her voice cutting through the room with the same flat authority she'd used on Dale Whitfield that morning. "Nurse, is there a back room, something with a lock?" The nurse, badge-reading Marie, didn't hesitate, years of trusting whoever spoke with that particular tone in an emergency. "Supply closet this way." Rena helped herd the mother and child and the elderly man through a narrow hallway just as the side door burst inward, Marsh stumbling through it, breathing hard, the calm clipboard authority from 20 minutes ago entirely gone, replaced by the raw panic of a man who had run out of rooms to hide in. He froze when he saw her. "You," he said. "Me," Rena said. For a long moment, 6 years collapsed into the space between them. Danny Cho's name, a valley she'd almost died in, a report that declared her dead so a shipment like the one sitting in that truck bed could keep moving unquestioned. "You should have stayed dead," Marsh said, breathing hard, eyes darting toward the hallway behind her, toward the last unblocked exit. "I tried that," Rena said. "Turns out I'm better at surviving than you are at covering your tracks." Sirens were closing fast outside now, and Marsh knew it, knew the math had already run out on him the same way it had run out on Dale Whitfield that morning, except this time there was no clean, technical fix, no pressure point, no calm countdown that could save him. He lunged, not at her, but past her, toward the hallway where the mother and child had just disappeared behind a supply closet door. Rena didn't think. She moved the way she'd been trained to move long before Millbrook ever existed for her, stepping into his path rather than away from it, using his own momentum against him the way she'd once been taught to control a combative patient in the back of a shaking helicopter under fire. It was over in seconds. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just controlled. By the time Reyes and 2 sheriff's deputies burst through the side door, Marsh was face down on the clinic's tile floor, breathing hard, cursing, done. Rena knelt over him just long enough to make sure he wasn't a threat anymore, then stood, straightened her borrowed vest, and looked toward the hallway where the supply closet door was cracking open, a small, frightened face peering out. "It's okay," she called softly, her voice gentling instantly, the same voice she'd use on Dale, on a wounded soldier, on anyone whose fear she needed to talk down. "It's over. You can come out." The toddler's mother stepped into view, shaking, clutching her son, staring at Rena like she didn't know whether to thank her or ask who on earth she was. Rena didn't have an easy answer for that anymore. Not the practiced one, anyway. Outside, deputies were cuffing Marsh's driver. Kessler stood over Marsh himself, reading him his rights in the flat, satisfied cadence of someone closing a case 6 months ahead of schedule. Reyes found Rena standing just outside the clinic's front door a few minutes later, watching the ambulance lights. She hadn't needed to call for herself, for once. "You good?" he asked. Rena looked down at her hands. "Steady. Still steady, even now, even after." "He has a chance," she said quietly. "Not about Marsh, but about the clinic full of people who would never know how close they'd come, about Danny Cho's name finally attached to something like justice, about 6 years that had finally, quietly, stopped being wasted." "Got him," Reyes said simply, glancing back toward the cruiser where Marsh sat handcuffed in the back seat. "Got him," Rena agreed. It wasn't a grand line. It didn't need to be. 3 weeks later, the story had made its way through every corner of Millbrook, then past it. A decorated flight surgeon presumed dead for 6 years, found alive, credited with stopping a defense contractor from selling defective trauma equipment to rural clinics across 3 counties. Elliot Marsh was formally charged with fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction, along with half a dozen counts tied directly to the falsified casualty report that had kept Rena listed as killed in action. The Navy opened a full review into how her status had been altered in the first place, and 2 more names, men who'd signed off on paperwork they should have questioned, were quietly relieved of their commissions before the review even finished. The County Health Board pulled every box of Marsh's equipment from every clinic that had received it, running the count all the way back 18 months. Investigators would later confirm what Rena already knew from a single glance at a shipping manifest. None of it would have worked when it mattered most. Frank Doyle did not fare much better. The story of a diner owner suspending a decorated war hero minutes after she saved a man's life spread fast enough that his insurance carrier dropped him within the month, and the diner changed hands by summer. Frank kept his job exactly as long as it took the new owner to hear the full story from Mr. Abernathy, who told it, apparently, at great and gleeful length. Rena Voss did not go back to hiding. The Navy, in a ceremony held not at a base but at a modest community hall in Millbrook, Rena's request, not theirs, formally corrected her service record. Colonel Hargrove presented her, 6 years late, with the Navy Cross that had once been shelved along with her supposed death, and read the citation aloud in front of a room that included Reyes, Kessler, Abernathy, and Dale Whitfield, fully recovered, his neck still wrapped in a thin surgical scar, standing in the back row because he'd insisted on coming. But the part of the ceremony that mattered most to Rena came after the medal, after the applause, after the reporters who'd shown up had gotten their photographs and left. The County Health Board, working with the Navy's Medical Corps, announced the creation of a new rural trauma training program. The kind of initiative that trains small-town clinics, volunteer EMTs, and rural hospital staff in exactly the skills Rena had used on Dale Whitfield in a diner with 1 traffic light. They named her the program's founding director. It wasn't a return to a cockpit or a war zone. It wasn't a return to invisibility, either. It was something new, a place where Lark, the decorated flight surgeon who never lost a soldier under fire, and Rena, the quiet woman who'd learned to disappear in order to survive, could finally exist as the same person, in the same room, without either one having to hide from the other. For 6 years, she said, standing at a podium in front of the small crowd that had gathered for the program's launch, I told myself that surviving meant disappearing. That the only way to protect what I knew, and the people I cared about, was to become someone nobody would ever look at twice. She paused, glancing toward the back row, where Abernathy sat with his cane propped against the folding chair beside him, watching her with the same quiet recognition he'd worn since the very first morning she stepped through his line of sight. An old friend of mine told me once that he'd noticed I always check the exits when I walk into a room, Rena said. He wasn't wrong. I've spent most of my adult life planning how to leave before anyone could see who I really was. She looked out at the small hall, Reyes near the front, Kessler beside him, Dale in the back, a dozen volunteer EMTs from clinics across the county who'd be trained under this new program, ready to learn the exact skills that had once been dismissed as too dangerous, too classified, too inconvenient to let live. I'm done checking exits, she said. This is where I'm staying. Abernathy, from the back row, allowed himself the smallest, proudest smile he'd worn in years. Somewhere in the world tonight, there's someone making themselves small. Not because they're weak. Because somewhere along the way they learned that being seen was dangerous, that hiding was safer than being known, and maybe it was, for a while. Maybe hiding is exactly what kept them alive long enough to make it to today. But there's a difference between the hiding that saves you and the hiding that slowly starts to bury you instead. Rena Voss learned that difference the hard way, in a diner, in front of strangers, with her hands finally steady enough to stop running. She didn't get her old life back. She built something better than that, a life where she didn't have to choose between who she used to be and who she was allowed to become. That's the whole story, really. Not that heroes hide. That eventually the right ones stop. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel keep telling stories like Rena's. Subscribe to Silent Heroes so you never miss the next one, and drop a comment down below. If you were Rena, would you have gone to that clinic yourself, or would you have let the professionals handle it? We read every single one. And if you're the kind of person who's been making yourself small for a while now, we see you. The next story is already waiting for you. The end.